Hey everyone! In today's video, we have an impactful and emotional story to share with you. We're going to hear from Jamal Henderson, a young man who had a near-death experience after being in a serious accident where he was unjustly chased by the police. Jamal will share all the details of that life-changing moment, what he experienced between life and death, and how it completely transformed his outlook on life and his purpose. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming inspiring videos. Let's get into it. My name is Jamal Henderson, and I'm a kid from Chicago. I grew up on the South Side, in a neighborhood where faith was as much a part of our lives as the air we breathed. My mother, Sarah Henderson, was the rock of our family. She made sure that every Sunday, without fail, we were sitting in the front row of Mount Zion Baptist Church, the kind of place where people would shout amen, louder than the pastor sometimes. My mother's faith was unshakable, and she passed that down to me in every way she could. She taught me to pray when I woke up, before every meal, and before I closed my eyes at night. But even as much as I tried to follow in her footsteps, life out here in Chicago had other plans. Growing up, I had this duality inside me. On the one hand, I was the good kid, the one who helped his mom carry groceries, who did his best to avoid trouble. On the other hand, I couldn't deny that the streets called to me. I knew people who lived that life, people I had grown up with, friends who'd taken paths my mom warned me about. I watched them drive around in cars with rims that gleamed under the streetlights while I was still taking the bus or walking home from school. They had money in their pockets when I was struggling to scrape together enough for the train. I didn't see them praying or going to church, but somehow they were thriving. Or at least that's what it looked like. It wasn't that I wanted to turn my back on everything I'd been taught. I loved my mom and respected her faith, but it felt like a clash between two worlds. In church, they told us to turn the other cheek, to love thy neighbor. Out there in the real world, though, you had to watch your back. You had to take care of yourself, or nobody would. And after a while, that voice inside telling me to do the right thing started to get drowned out by something else: survival. My old friends, the ones from the neighborhood, guys like Rico and Malik, had gotten deep into the streets. They didn't just flirt with that life, they married it. Rico used to be my best friend when we were kids. We'd play basketball at the park until the streetlights came on, then head home like we were supposed to. Now he was running with a crew, making moves I never thought he would. Malik wasn't much different. It was weird seeing them go down that path, but at the same time, I understood it. The world doesn't give us many chances, and they weren't about to wait around for a miracle. And in that moment, I didn't know if I could either. So, when they came around, telling me about ways to make quick cash, I listened. I wasn't about to dive headfirst into crime, but I let myself be around it. I told myself I was smarter than that. I wouldn't get caught up. I could keep my distance and just pick up what fell off the table. I figured that if I played it right, I could make some money without sacrificing who I was. But it didn't work that way. The streets don't let you play the game halfway. Slowly, my face became familiar to people in all the wrong places. Cops who didn't know me but saw a young black man in a hoodie and assumed the worst. And even though I hadn't done anything, being around the wrong people painted a target on my back. My mom warned me. She saw the change in me before I even noticed it myself. She'd say, "Jamal, you think you're just watching, but you're standing too close to the fire. Sooner or later, it's gonna burn you." I nodded, told her I understood, but deep down, I didn't. Not yet. Looking back, I realized that was the start of something much bigger. It was the moment I began to walk away from everything I had been raised to believe, from the safety of my mother's teachings, into a world where the line between right and wrong blurred until it almost disappeared. And it's that blur, that choice to step into the gray, that led me to the darkest night of my life. The night when I almost didn't make it out. The change didn't happen all at once. I wasn't some straight-laced kid who flipped a switch overnight. It was more like a slow fade, a little compromise here, a small decision there. At first, it was just hanging out with Rico and Malik a little more often. We'd meet up after work, sometimes playing basketball like old times, sometimes just cruising the neighborhood. I told myself it was harmless. I wasn't doing what they were doing. I wasn't selling drugs or pulling any fast moves on people, but I was there, and being there was enough. The problem was, being around them gave me access to things that weren't part of my world before. I was making connections, not even realizing how deep it was getting. It wasn't until one night when Rico said to me, "Yo, Jamal, you want to roll with us to make some moves?" that I understood I'd been pulled in without even trying. "Nah, man," I answered, shaking my head, trying to keep it casual. "I'm good. Just here to chill." Rico laughed. It wasn't a threatening laugh, but it was one of those knowing ones, like he could see something in me that I hadn't fully come to terms with. "Yeah, that's what I thought at first too," he said, shrugging. "But trust me, it's easy. You could use the cash, right? Plus, we keep it low-key." It was tempting. I hated that it was tempting. My mind flashed to my mom, sitting on the worn couch in our tiny apartment, counting out bills every month just to make sure we could keep the lights on. She worked double shifts as a nurse's assistant, barely scraping by. I could help her. I could be the man of the house, step up and take some of that burden off her shoulders. That's what I kept telling myself. This wasn't for me. It was for her. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the life she wanted for me. She had worked so hard to keep me on the right path, to steer me clear of the streets and all the traps they held. And yet, here I was, standing on the edge, wondering if I should jump. Rico and Malik, they didn't pressure me, at least not overtly. But their presence, their success in that life, spoke louder than any words. I was watching them stack money, drive better cars, and wear clothes that I could never afford. And it got to me. It's hard to resist when everything around you feels like it's moving in the opposite direction of where you're supposed to go. You start wondering if maybe you're the one missing something, the one not seeing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture for me? It was survival. It was making sure my mom didn't have to struggle anymore. I knew it wasn't the right way to do it, but at the time, it felt like the only way. The thing about bad decisions is that they don't come with big warning signs. They don't announce themselves as life-altering choices. Instead, they sneak up on you, disguised as small, inconsequential things. That's what happened to me. I started staying out later. I started avoiding my mom's calls when I was with Rico and Malik because I didn't want to hear her disappointment. She could sense it. She always could. "Jamal, baby, I'm worried about you," she'd say whenever I did pick up the phone. "These streets ain't no place for you. You know better. You were raised better." "I know, Ma," I'd respond, trying to sound convincing. "I'm just hanging out. I'm not into anything like that." But even as I said the words, I could feel them cracking at the edges. I was in deeper than I wanted to admit. And while I wasn't committing any crimes myself, it didn't matter. Cops don't ask for your moral standing when they see you rolling with people like Rico. They don't care about the distinctions I was making in my head. That became painfully clear one night when Malik got pulled over while I was with him. We weren't even doing anything, just driving, listening to music, shooting the breeze. But when those flashing lights came up behind us, everything changed. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms sweating as I gripped the door handle. I wasn't even scared about what would happen in that moment. I was scared about how this one moment could redefine everything. The officer approached the car slowly, his flashlight beaming into the back seat. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, not bothering to hide the tension in his voice. Malik and I did as we were told, but I could feel the judgment in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just about a routine stop. It was about who we were, two black men, late at night, in a part of town that cops didn't like seeing us in. As the interaction played out, I realized something terrifying. Even though I wasn't doing anything wrong, being in the wrong place with the wrong people was enough. The police didn't care that I was a good kid deep down. All they saw was my skin, my hoodie, and the company I kept. It was a warning shot from life, one I should have heeded, but I didn't. I told myself I could still balance on that tightrope, keeping one foot in both worlds. But as I would soon learn, The world I was dipping into had a way of yanking you off balance before you even knew what hit you. I should have listened to my gut that night when Malik and I got pulled over. Something about the way those cops looked at us, the disdain in their voices, it stuck with me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. But instead of pulling back, I convinced myself I was invincible. That was the thing about growing up where I did. You learn to wear your toughness like armor, even when it's just a thin layer covering up all your fear. It was a few weeks later, on a night like any other, when everything went sideways. Rico and Malik had hit me up to hang out. We weren't doing anything serious, just driving around, talking about life, the usual. The sun had set hours ago, and the streets were quiet, that kind of eerie quiet that only the city can have at night. We were laughing about something dumb when I noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. They were coming up fast, too fast. At first, I thought it was just someone speeding through, but then I saw the flash of red and blue. A cop car. Damn, I muttered, trying to keep my cool, but my stomach dropped. Rico glanced in the mirror, his face hardening. Don't sweat it, man. Just play it cool. But I knew better. This wasn't going to be a regular traffic stop. Not for us. The lights behind us flashed again, but there were no sirens. Just the silent demand to pull over. I could feel my pulse in my neck, beating so hard it hurt. I wasn't holding anything illegal, but I knew that didn't matter. They weren't going to care about the details. They never did. Should I pull over? I asked, my voice low, trying not to let the fear creep in. Rico looked at me, his expression unreadable. Nah, man. Just keep driving for now. They might be on something else. I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I kept going, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I turned down a side street, trying to stay calm, but the cruiser followed us, its headlights cutting through the darkness. That's when the adrenaline kicked in, flooding my system like ice in my veins. Yo, they're not going anywhere, Malik said from the back seat, his voice tight with tension. What's their problem? I had no answer. All I knew was that this situation was turning bad, fast. I could feel it in the air, the tension, the weight of history pressing down on us. I didn't want to run, but the fear of what could happen if we stopped was suffocating. In my mind, I replayed every story I'd heard about young black men getting pulled over for nothing and ending up on the wrong side of a gun. Just pull over, Jamal, Rico said suddenly, his tone changing. Don't give them a reason. I nodded, but before I could even slow down, the lights behind us flared brighter, and suddenly, there was a loud bang. A thud that jolted the entire car. I lost control for a split second, the tires screeching as the car swerved. They hit us. I shouted, panic rising in my chest. Yo, what the hell? Malik screamed from the back, twisting around to look. Another hit. This one harder, sending us skidding toward the edge of the road. My heart was pounding so loud in my ears I couldn't hear anything else. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't just a stop. This was something else. I tried to steady the car, but it was too late. The road was curving ahead, and with the cruiser practically pushing us off the road, I couldn't get control back. The tires slipped, and in the blink of an eye, we veered off the pavement, the world tilting as we careened toward the guardrail. I slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't stop. There was a sickening crash as we broke through the barrier. Time seemed to slow down as the car flew off the edge, and all I could think was, this is it. This is how it ends. The weightlessness of falling was surreal. My stomach lurched, and everything inside me went cold. I could hear Rico shouting, but his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another world. My hands were still gripping the wheel, but it felt like I wasn't really there anymore. Like I was watching from outside myself, helpless to do anything but wait for the impact. For a split second, the world outside the windshield disappeared into darkness. The car spun as we plummeted, and the ground rushed up to meet us. I don't know how long we fell. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like forever, like I was suspended in this strange limbo where nothing made sense. Then, we hit the ground. Hard. The force of it knocked the breath out of me, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, there was a moment of eerie silence. No pain, no sound, just a stillness that felt otherworldly. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, slow and steady, like the rhythm of some far-off drum. I tried to move, but my body didn't respond. It was like I was trapped inside myself, aware of everything but powerless to do anything about it. In that strange stillness, a thought floated through my mind. Is this what it feels like to die? I waited for the pain to hit, for the fear to consume me, but instead, I felt nothing. Just a calm, almost peaceful sensation spreading through my body. It was like the weight of everything, the fear, the panic, the anger, was lifting, leaving me floating in this space between worlds. That's when I realized something. The car was gone. The crash, the fall, everything had disappeared. It was just me, suspended in this quiet, empty space, like I had stepped outside of time. And that's when I heard the voice. The voice was quiet at first, like a whisper, barely noticeable against the stillness that surrounded me. It wasn't a voice I recognized, and yet, it felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't coming from any particular direction. It was inside me, outside me, everywhere. Jamal. It was a single word, but it reverberated through me, sending a shiver down my spine. I tried to move, to find out where I was, but my body still wasn't responding. There was no pain, though, just that strange sense of detachment, as if my mind had separated from the physical world. Then the memories came flooding back. The police chase, the crash, the feeling of the car spinning out of control. I remembered the sickening crunch as we hit the ground, the way the world seemed to disappear the moment we left the road. The last thing I recalled was the impact, so powerful it felt like my body had been crushed into nothing. But here I was, whole, floating in this strange space. The voice came again, stronger this time. Jamal, listen. I wanted to scream, to ask what was happening, but no sound came out. Instead, the world around me seemed to shift, and I was no longer alone in the darkness. Slowly, shapes began to form, a landscape of shadows and faint light, like the world was reassembling itself before my eyes. It was a place I had never been, and yet it felt strangely familiar. The first thing I noticed was the sky. It wasn't like any sky I had ever seen. There was light, but it wasn't coming from the sun or the moon. It was more like the air itself was glowing, soft and golden, casting everything in a warm, ethereal glow. The ground beneath me felt solid, but I couldn't see it, just sense it. It was like standing in a dream, a place where reality had been redefined. I tried to breathe, but there was no need. It was as if I existed without a body, without the need for air, food, or even time itself. Everything felt timeless, suspended in an endless moment. Then, the voice came again. Do you understand what's happened? I shook my head, though I wasn't sure if I had actually moved. My thoughts were jumbled, filled with confusion and disbelief. Was I dead? The voice seemed to hear my question, even though I hadn't spoken it aloud. Not yet, but you were close. The words sent a jolt through me. I was close to death? My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. Is this heaven? No, the voice answered, calm and patient. Not heaven, but not earth either. As I absorbed those words, another realization struck me. The police, they did this. They were trying to kill me. The weight of that truth sank in, and for the first time, the calm I had been feeling gave way to a rush of emotions. Anger, fear, confusion. The cops hadn't just been trying to stop me. They had been chasing me, pushing me off the road, intent on destroying me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a routine traffic stop gone wrong. It was deliberate. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, but again, the voice spoke, soothing the rage building inside me. You were caught in something bigger than you, Jamal. The system has been designed to see you as a threat, even when you're not. It isn't about you as a person. It's about the fear they carry. Fear of who you represent. The words stung because they were true. I had felt it all my life. The way people looked at me, the way they treated me, like I was dangerous just because of the color of my skin. And now, that fear had almost killed me. But why? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I had actually spoken aloud or just thought the question. The voice paused, as if considering. Because the world you live in is broken. Fear drives the hate, and hate feeds the violence. But that's not the end of your story, Jamal. There's more for you to do. The words felt heavy, like they carried a meaning I wasn't ready to understand. More to do? I didn't know what that meant. How could I have more to do when my life had just been shattered? When the world had shown me that no matter how hard I tried, I was still just another black man in a system that wanted me dead. The voice softened, almost like a parent comforting a child. You're not alone, Jamal. You've never been alone. Even in the darkest moments, there is light. But you have to choose to see it. I tried to respond, but the world around me shifted again. The glow of the sky dimmed, and I felt a pull, like something was tugging at me, pulling me away from this strange, peaceful place. I resisted, wanting to stay, to understand more, but the force was stronger. The voice echoed one last time, its words lingering in the air as I felt myself being dragged back. You have a purpose, Jamal. You were saved for a reason. Remember that. And just like that, the light faded, and I was plunged back into the darkness. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was pain, sharp and all-encompassing, like fire shooting through every nerve in my body. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, the cold, sterile smell of the hospital filling my lungs. Everything was hazy at first, the beeping of machines and the distant murmur of voices fading in and out. I blinked, trying to focus, and slowly, the world came into view. White hospital walls, bright overhead lights, and the steady beep of the heart monitor beside me. I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I had survived the crash. But the peace I had felt in that other place, the calm and serenity, it was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of pain and confusion. My body ached in ways I couldn't describe, and as I lay there, trying to piece together what had happened, the memory of that voice came rushing back. I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't. That place, those words, they were real, and they had left me with more questions than answers. As I lay in that hospital bed, staring up at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind. Why had I been saved? Lying there in that hospital bed, the room was quiet, except for the constant beeping of the machines monitoring my vitals. My body felt heavy, pinned down by the weight of exhaustion, but my mind raced, still reeling from everything I had just gone through. The pain throbbed through every inch of me, a dull reminder of the crash, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the turmoil swirling in my head. I had been so close to death. That thought looped in my mind like a broken record. The crash had been brutal, so violent that I still couldn't understand how I was alive. The moment the car flew off the road played over and over in my mind, like a nightmare I couldn't shake. The sense of weightlessness, the way everything had gone silent, the world around me fading as I plummeted into the abyss. It had felt like the end. But then there was that other place, that strange, glowing realm where time had stopped and a voice had spoken to me. The peace I'd felt there was unlike anything I'd ever known. It wasn't just the absence of pain. It was something deeper, something spiritual. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. It wasn't just the trauma of the crash messing with my mind. That place had been real, or at least as real as anything I had ever experienced. And the voice, whoever or whatever it was, had left me with a message I couldn't ignore. I was pulled out of my thoughts by the soft click of the door opening. My mother entered the room, her face drawn with worry, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked so small in that moment, her usual strength dimmed by fear and exhaustion. I could see the relief wash over her as she saw me awake, but it was mixed with something else, grief, maybe, or a deep, unspoken fear that she had almost lost her son. "Jamal," she whispered, crossing the room in quick steps. She took my hand gently, as if afraid to hurt me, though the warmth of her touch felt like an anchor pulling me back to the real world. "Ma," I croaked, my voice rough, barely recognizable even to myself. Tears welled in her eyes as she held my hand to her chest. "I thought I'd lost you, baby." Her words hit me hard, a flood of emotions crashing over me. I had been so close to leaving this world, so close to slipping away forever. But I was here, alive. Somehow, I had been spared. "You almost did," I whispered, my throat dry. "But I'm still here." She nodded, her grip tightening slightly, and for a moment, we just sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging between us. I could see in her eyes that she was trying to hold it together, to stay strong for me, but the fear of almost losing me was written all over her face. I didn't know how to tell her what I'd experienced. How do you explain something like that to someone who has spent their whole life believing in one version of the afterlife, only to encounter something completely different? I was somewhere else, I began, unsure of how to explain. When the car went off the road, I thought I was gone, Ma. I thought it was over. She frowned, confused but listening closely. What do you mean, somewhere else? I don't know how to explain it, I said, closing my eyes as I tried to find the words. It was like I wasn't in my body anymore. Everything went dark, and then I was in this place, this light. There was this calm, this peace I've never felt before. And there was a voice. Her hand tightened in mine, and I could feel the tension in her as she listened, her eyes searching mine for understanding. She had always believed in the afterlife, in heaven, and the promise of eternal peace. But this wasn't exactly what she had taught me. Even so, she didn't interrupt. She just listened. It told me that I wasn't supposed to die, that I had more to do here. Her brow furrowed, and for a long moment, she said nothing. I could see her processing what I was telling her, trying to fit it into the framework of her faith, her understanding of God and life and death. You think it was God? I hesitated. That was the question that had been gnawing at me since I woke up. The voice didn't sound like the booming, almighty God I'd grown up hearing about in church. It didn't feel like the direct voice of the Lord as described in the Bible, but it was something divine, something greater than myself. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe, but it didn't feel like I was in heaven or anything. It was different, like a place in between. She nodded slowly, her face softening as she took in my words. Maybe it was God's way of showing you that your time here isn't over. I guess, I muttered, but the words felt hollow. I wasn't sure what to make of the experience, but it had shaken me to my core. Whatever that voice was, God, a spirit, or something else, I couldn't deny the message it had left me with. I've been praying for you, my mom said softly, praying that God would watch over you. Maybe that was his way of answering. I looked at her, the raw faith in her eyes, and for a moment, I wished I could see things as clearly as she did. But the experience had left me with more questions than answers. Why had I been spared? What was this purpose I was supposed to fulfill? As my mother sat beside me, her hand in mine, I realized that whatever the answer was, I couldn't ignore it. I had been given a second chance, and now it was up to me to figure out what to do with it. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the sterile white walls and listening to the steady beeping of the machines, I kept replaying the crash, the moment I left my body, and most of all, the voice. The peace I had felt in that place, whatever it was unlike anything I had ever known. But what haunted me wasn't just the memory of that otherworldly calm. It was the message. You were saved for a reason. You have more to do. What did that even mean? I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger than me had been at work. But the more I tried to wrap my head around it, the more questions piled up. Why me? What was this purpose I was supposed to fulfill? And if I had a purpose, why had I spent so much time walking down the wrong path? It was late one evening, a few days after I had regained consciousness, when I finally found the courage to confront these questions. The hospital was quiet, the lights dimmed to a soft glow, and my mom had gone home to rest. I was alone, or at least I thought I was, until I heard a familiar voice, soft but unmistakable, call my name. Jamal. I blinked, my heart jumping into my throat. The voice wasn't coming from inside the room, and yet, I could hear it as clearly as if someone were standing right next to me. My breath caught in my chest as I felt the same presence I had felt during the accident, the same feeling of calm washing over me. I'm here, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. What do you want from me? The room seemed to hum with energy, and for a moment, I thought I might be losing my mind. But then I felt it, an overwhelming sense of warmth, like a hand resting gently on my shoulder, though no one was there. It was the same feeling I'd had when the voice first spoke to me after the crash, the same presence that had told me I wasn't supposed to die. I wasn't alone. "You have more to do," the voice said again. But this time, there was something different. It wasn't just a command. It was an invitation, as if the voice were asking me to see the truth for myself. "It's time to understand." My heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled to find my voice. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "What am I supposed to do? What's my purpose?" Silence followed for a moment, and I thought the presence might have disappeared. But then the room seemed to shift around me, like the air itself was vibrating. My vision blurred, and before I could make sense of what was happening, the world faded away. It was like slipping into a dream, but this time, I knew it wasn't a dream. I was back in that glowing place, the one I had seen right after the crash. But now, it was different. It wasn't just a space of light and peace. There were shadows here, too, faint, but undeniable. The golden glow still surrounded me, but I could see the darkness pressing in at the edges, like something lurking just beyond my sight. "You are not alone in this world, Jamal," the voice said, softer now, almost comforting. "There is light, but there is also darkness. You have seen it." The images flashed before my eyes. My life on the streets, the way people looked at me, the cops chasing me for no reason other than the color of my skin. I saw the fear in their eyes, the hate that had driven them to run me off the road. I saw Rico and Malik, their lives spiraling down paths I didn't want to follow. I saw my mother, her face lined with worry, praying for me every night, trying to shield me from a world that seemed determined to tear me down. "You were caught in the darkness," the voice continued, "but the darkness is not your destiny." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent so much time angry at the world for what it had done to me, angry at the cops for chasing me, angry at myself for letting my life drift off course. But now, as I stood in this strange, glowing place, I realized that my anger had been blinding me to something deeper. It wasn't just about me. It was about something much bigger, about the system that had created the fear and hate, the system that saw people like me as a threat just for existing. "You are not a victim of the darkness," the voice said, firm but gentle. "You have the power to change it." I shook my head, my chest tight with emotion. How? How can I change anything? The light around me pulsed, and I could feel the presence growing stronger. By speaking, by sharing your story, by showing the world that love is stronger than fear. I wanted to argue, to tell the voice that I wasn't the one for this, that I wasn't a leader or a preacher. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been given a second chance for a reason. I had survived for a reason. "You saw the darkness," the voice continued, "but now you must become the light." The weight of those words settled over me, heavy but not crushing. They didn't feel like a burden. They felt like a challenge, a call to action. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever had saved me from that crash, whatever had brought me to this place, was telling me something I couldn't unhear. "You have a choice, Jamal," the voice said, softer now. "You can turn away, return to the life you knew, or you can step into your purpose." I stood there, the glow surrounding me, the darkness at the edges, and I knew what I had to do. I had been running for too long, running from the truth, from my own potential, from the world that had tried to break me. But now, I had a second chance. I couldn't waste it. "I won't run anymore," I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding with certainty. "I'll do what I need to do." The light pulsed one last time, and the voice whispered, "Then go, Jamal, and be the change." With that, the world faded again, and I felt myself falling. Not in fear this time, but in surrender, trusting that wherever I landed, it was where I was meant to be. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the hospital room. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead stung my eyes, and the steady beeping of the heart monitor rang in my ears. My body was still sore, every muscle aching as though I had been through a battle. But it wasn't the physical pain that overwhelmed me. It was the weight of what I had just experienced. The divine presence, the voice, the revelation. It all lingered in my mind like a distant echo, both comforting and unsettling at the same time. I had made a decision in that glowing place, a promise to step into my purpose, But now, lying here in this hospital bed, the enormity of that choice began to sink in. What exactly was I supposed to do? How was I going to be the change, the light in a world so full of darkness? I stared up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all when the door creaked open. I turned my head slowly, wincing at the pain in my neck, and saw my mother standing there. Her eyes were red from crying, her face weary, but the relief that washed over her when she saw me awake again was unmistakable. She rushed to my side, clutching my hand as if holding on to me would somehow keep me from slipping away again. "Thank God, you're awake," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so scared, Jamal. I didn't know if you were going to make it." I squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her grip, but for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. How could I tell her about everything that had happened? The crash, the near-death experience, the voice. It all felt so surreal, like a dream I had just woken from. But it wasn't a dream. It had been real, more real than anything I had ever felt. "I'm here, Ma," I said, my voice hoarse, the words coming out slow. "I made it." She sat down beside me, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for some sign that I was really okay. "You scared me," she said again, her voice breaking. "The doctors said it was a miracle you survived. They said. They didn't know if you'd wake up." I swallowed hard, trying to find the words to explain what I had experienced. How could I tell her that I had come so close to crossing over? How could I describe the voice, the sense of purpose that had been placed on my shoulders in that strange, glowing realm? I wanted to tell her everything, but I didn't know if she'd understand. I wasn't even sure if I understood. "I saw something," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "When I was out, it wasn't just the crash, Ma. I went somewhere. I heard a voice." She looked at me, her eyes wide, waiting for me to continue. I could see the concern in her expression, the way she held her breath, not sure where I was going with this. "It wasn't like anything I've ever felt," I continued, the memory of that place coming back to me in vivid detail. I was floating, like I wasn't in my body anymore. Everything was peaceful, but there was this voice. It told me I wasn't supposed to die, that I had more to do. It was like I was being given a second chance. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she listened. She had always been a woman of deep faith, and I knew that part of her would want to believe what I was saying, but I could also see the fear in her eyes. Fear that I had been through too much, that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But I had never been more certain of anything in my life. "I don't know what it was," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "Maybe it was God. Maybe it was something else. But it felt real, Ma. It felt like I was being shown something, like there's a reason I'm still here." She nodded slowly, her tears spilling over as she wiped them away with the back of her hand. "God works in mysterious ways, baby. I've always believed that. Maybe this is his way of telling you that your life has a purpose, that you're meant for something greater." I let her words sink in, my mind racing as I tried to reconcile what I had experienced with what I had always believed. My mother's faith had always been unshakable, and now, for the first time, I felt a glimmer of that same faith stirring inside me. But this wasn't just about faith. It was about action. The voice had told me that I needed to be the change, to bring light into a world filled with darkness. It wasn't enough to just believe. I had to do something. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, the reality of what I had survived began to settle over me. The crash hadn't just been an accident. The police had been chasing me with intent, running me off the road because of the color of my skin, because of the fear they carried in their hearts. And now, somehow, I had been spared. I had been given a second chance. But with that second chance came responsibility. "I don't know how I'm supposed to do it," I said softly, more to myself than to my mother. "But I can't ignore it. I can't pretend like nothing happened." "You don't have to have all the answers right now," my mother said gently, her hand still gripping mine. "What matters is that you're alive. You have time to figure it out, to listen to what God or whoever is guiding you. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I had been saved for a reason. And whatever that reason was, I couldn't run from it anymore. As the days passed, the fog of recovery began to lift, and the reality of what had happened started to sink in. My body was healing, though every movement still hurt like hell, and my mind was gradually sharpening. But the emotional weight, the trauma, the confusion, the sense of injustice, remained heavy on my chest, a constant reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. One afternoon, not long after I had started physical therapy, I was sitting in the hospital room, staring out the window. The world outside seemed so normal, cars driving by, people going about their lives, while mine had been flipped upside down. The crash, the voice, the second chance, it all felt like a lifetime ago, and yet the memories were still fresh, lingering like an unhealed wound. It was then that I noticed the TV in the corner of the room, the volume low but the images flashing across the screen. I hadn't been paying much attention to the news lately, too caught up in my own recovery to care about what was happening outside these walls. But something about the report caught my eye. Familiar streets, a neighborhood I knew all too well. And then I saw it, the footage. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was grainy, like it had been taken from a street camera or maybe someone's phone. But the scene was unmistakable. It was my car, the one I had been driving that night. The police cruiser was tailing me, close enough that it seemed like they were almost touching. My heart started to race as I watched, my breath catching in my throat. The reporter's voice cut through the haze in my mind. Newly released footage shows the police chase that led to the crash of Jamal Henderson, a young black man from Chicago. The footage, captured by street cameras and eyewitnesses, has sparked outrage as it appears to show the police deliberately ramming Henderson's vehicle off the road. I sat up in the bed, wincing at the pain that shot through my ribs, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. The footage showed it all, the chase, the moment the cruiser hit my car, the way I lost control and veered off the road. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, reliving those terrifying seconds as the car spun out and crashed. They did it on purpose, I whispered to myself, the words bitter on my tongue. I had known it deep down, of course. I had felt it in the way the car had jolted, in the way they had closed in on me like a predator hunting its prey. But seeing it on the screen, laid out in front of the entire world, it made the injustice undeniable. The news continued, showing interviews with people from my neighborhood, activists, community leaders, all of them demanding justice. My face appeared on the screen, a picture from some years back, when I still had that innocent, hopeful look in my eyes. The reporter talked about the growing protests, the calls for an investigation into the officers involved. The words, police brutality, and racial profiling flashed on the screen, and I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me. I had been a target, not because I had done anything wrong, but because of who I was, because of the way I looked, because to them, I was just another black man in a hoodie, someone they could harass, someone they could hunt. I clenched my fists, the anger coursing through me. My mind raced back to that night, the way my heart had pounded as the police followed me, the fear that had gripped me when they hit the car. I remembered the darkness, the feeling of my life slipping away as the car flew off the road. And then, I remembered the voice, the calm, the promise. You were saved for a reason. But what was that reason? To live with the knowledge that I had almost been killed, that the system had tried to erase me like I was nothing? Or was it to fight back, to stand up against the injustice that had nearly taken my life? As I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized that this was part of it. The voice, the second chance, it wasn't just about me surviving. It was about exposing the truth. It was about making sure that this didn't happen to anyone else. The footage had come out. The world was starting to see what I had known all along. But it wasn't enough. I couldn't just be a silent witness to my own survival. I had to speak. I had to fight. Just then, the door to my room swung open, and my mom stepped in, her face drawn with worry. She saw the look on my face, the way my fists were clenched, and she followed my gaze to the TV. Her expression shifted as she took in the footage, the weight of the situation hitting her like a freight train. They released it?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my jaw tight. "Yeah, they did." She sat down beside me, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "I prayed every day, Jamal. prayed that God would protect you. And now the whole world can see what they did. You weren't crazy. You weren't imagining it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, her grip on my hand tightening. This is your moment, baby. God gave you a second chance for a reason. And now, you have to decide what you're going to do with it. Her words echoed the voice I had heard in that glowing realm, the message that had been seared into my mind. You have more to do. You are not a victim of the darkness. You have the power to change it. I looked at her, my heart heavy with emotion. I'm going to fight, Ma. I don't know how yet, but I'm not going to let this slide. I'm not going to let them get away with it. She nodded, her tears spilling over this time. But her voice was steady, full of the strength that had carried her through so many struggles. I'll be right beside you, baby. Whatever you decide, we'll fight this together. The weight of the decision settled over me, but it didn't feel crushing. It felt like purpose. It felt like the first step towards something bigger. The world had seen what they had tried to do to me, and now it was time to make sure that justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been in my shoes. The days after the release of the footage were a whirlwind. It was as if a dam had broken, and the floodwaters of anger, outrage, and demand for justice swept through my community and beyond. What had happened to me wasn't just another story about a black man being harassed by the police. It became a symbol of something bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. News outlets covered it constantly. Protesters filled the streets, their chants echoing in the air, demanding accountability. People from my neighborhood, people who had known me since I was a kid, stood shoulder to shoulder with activists and leaders who had been fighting this battle long before my name became a headline. Signs bearing my face, alongside words like "Justice for Jamal" and "Stop Police Terror," filled the air. I watched it all unfold from my hospital room, still too weak to join them, but their voices carried through the window, and I could feel the power of their collective anger and hope. It wasn't just the local news either. National outlets picked up the story, and soon, my name was being spoken in cities far beyond Chicago. It felt surreal, seeing my face on the screen, hearing my name in conversations about systemic racism and police brutality. But it wasn't just about me. I was just one face in a long line of faces, one story among many. What had happened to me had happened to countless others. The difference now was that this time, there was no denying the truth. The footage had shown the world what they tried to do, and now the world was demanding justice. I had meetings with lawyers, civil rights organizations, people who wanted to help me navigate the legal battle that was sure to come. At first, it was overwhelming, the flood of support and attention, but as I spoke with them, something became clear. This wasn't just about my case. This was about creating change, real change, for people like me, people who had been targeted, hunted, and nearly erased by a system that saw us as threats. One afternoon, about a week after the footage had gone public, my lawyer, a sharp woman named Angela who had been fighting cases like mine for years, sat down beside me in the hospital. Her expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Jamal, we've got some news," she said, flipping through a stack of papers. "The officers involved in your case, Officer Callahan and Officer Vickers, they've been placed on administrative leave while the investigation is underway." I nodded slowly, the anger still simmering beneath the surface. Administrative leave. It felt like such a small consequence for what they had done. But Angela wasn't finished. "There's more," she continued. "The footage was damning. It's not just us saying it anymore. There's been pressure from the public, from activists, and now even from within the department. The officers are facing criminal charges. Vehicular assault, reckless endangerment, and possibly even attempted murder. Those words, attempted murder, hung in the air between us. It was what I had known all along, but hearing it spoken aloud, hearing that there might be real consequences for what they had done, made my chest tighten. "They're actually going to be charged?" I asked, my voice low, as if speaking it too loudly might shatter the fragile possibility. Angela nodded. "Yes, there's enough evidence, and the public outcry is forcing their hand. They can't sweep this under the rug." I sat back, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The anger I had carried for so long felt justified now, but it was mixed with something else, something like hope, but not quite. It wasn't just about getting them punished. It was about sending a message. It was about making sure this didn't happen to anyone else. The investigation moved quickly after that. The public pressure, combined with the evidence from the footage, made it impossible for the department to drag their feet. Within a month, Officer Callahan and Officer Vickers were officially charged, and their trial dates were set. The media followed every development, and the protests only grew louder. People wanted justice, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. I spent hours talking with Angela and her team, preparing for the trial. We went over the details of that night, over and over again, until I could practically see the events play out in my mind like a movie. It was exhausting, reliving that fear and anger, but I knew it was necessary. I had to be ready to face them in court. The day of the trial, I finally left the hospital. My body was still weak, and the scars from the crash were a constant reminder of how close I had come to death, but I was determined to be there. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for my dignity, for my life, and for the lives of so many others who had been silenced. When I walked into that courtroom, the tension was palpable. The officers sat at the defense table, their faces impassive, but I could feel their eyes on me as I took my seat. My mother was beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly. Behind us, the courtroom was packed with supporters, people from my neighborhood, activists, reporters. The world was watching. The trial was long, and at times, it was brutal. The defense tried to paint me as a suspect, someone who had been running from the police, trying to justify their actions. But the footage spoke for itself. It showed the truth, the way they had followed me without cause, the way they had rammed my car off the road with reckless disregard for my life. There was no escaping the facts. When the verdict finally came, I held my breath. The judge's voice was steady as he read the charges. Guilty, on all counts. A wave of relief and emotion washed over me. My mother cried softly beside me, and I could hear the murmurs of satisfaction from the crowd behind us. But for me, it wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. It was about finally seeing the system acknowledge what had happened and hold the people responsible to account. As we left the courtroom, the cameras followed us, reporters shouting questions, but I wasn't focused on them. I was focused on what came next. The officers had been punished, but this was just one battle in a much larger war. There were still countless others out there. People like me, people who hadn't been so lucky, people whose stories hadn't been caught on camera. I had a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. In the weeks that followed the trial, everything changed. I walked out of that courtroom as a free man, but I knew deep down that my life would never be the same. I had survived something that could have easily destroyed me, both physically and emotionally. The weight of that reality settled in my bones, not in a way that felt burdensome, but in a way that gave me purpose. The voice that had spoken to me in that strange, glowing place still echoed in my mind. You have more to do. As much as the victory in court mattered, as much as it meant that the system had been forced to recognize what those officers had done, I knew my fight wasn't over. There were others, people whose stories weren't being told, whose names didn't make it to the news. The footage of my crash had given me a platform, a voice, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. But it wasn't just about the world outside. Something had shifted inside of me too. The Jamal who had driven those streets before the crash, the one who was trying to balance his faith and the pull of the streets, was gone. In his place was someone new, someone who had seen death and come back, someone who had been given a second chance for a reason. I didn't fully understand what that reason was yet, but I knew that I couldn't ignore it. The first thing I did after the trial was sit down with my mother. We hadn't had a real conversation about what had happened since I woke up in the hospital. She had been there every step of the way, but there was a distance between us, an unspoken tension. I think she was waiting for me to find my own way, to figure out what all of this meant for me before we dove into it. We sat at the kitchen table, the smell of her cooking filling the room, a comforting reminder of home. I could see the worry etched into her face, lines that hadn't been there before the crash. She had always been strong, always carried herself with a grace that I admired, but I knew this had shaken her. Seeing her only son nearly die, seeing him pulled into a fight against a system so much larger than both of us, it had taken a toll. "Ma," I started. my voice quiet but firm. "I need to talk to you about everything. About what happened, about what's next." She didn't say anything at first, just set her hands gently on the table and looked at me with those deep, knowing eyes that seemed to see right through me. "I know you've been carrying a lot, Jamal," she said softly. "And I know that what you went through changed you. It changed me too. I've been praying every night, asking God to show me how to help you through this." I nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened when I almost didn't make it, about the voice I heard. It told me I had more to do, that I wasn't supposed to die." She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "I believe that, Jamal. I believe God kept you here for a reason. That's what I'm trying to figure out," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I know I have a second chance, but I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do with it. All I know is that I can't go back to the way things were. I can't just live my life like nothing happened." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. Her touch was warm, grounding me. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you have to listen. Listen to that voice. Listen to what's stirring inside of you. The answers will come." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my soul. It wasn't about figuring everything out immediately. It was about taking one step at a time, trusting that the path would reveal itself as I walked it. The next few months were a blur of speaking engagements, interviews, and meetings with community leaders. People wanted to hear my story, wanted to know how I had survived, how I had faced death and come back stronger. I told my story over and over again, each time feeling a little more clarity, a little more purpose. But it wasn't just about me. It was about the message. It was about using my voice to shine a light on the systemic issues that had nearly taken my life. I started working with local organizations focused on police reform and racial justice, lending my name and my story to their cause. At first, it felt strange, like I didn't belong in those spaces, like I was just some kid who had gotten lucky. But the more I immersed myself in the work, the more I realized that my story was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. I wasn't the first person to go through this, and I wouldn't be the last. But if my voice could help amplify the voices of others, if my story could help bring about even a small amount of change, then I had to keep going. One night, after speaking at a rally downtown, I found myself alone on the rooftop of a building overlooking the city. The noise of the crowd below still echoed in my ears, but up here, it was quiet. The city stretched out before me, the lights twinkling like stars on the horizon. As I stood there, looking out at the place I called home, I thought about the night of the crash, about how everything had changed in an instant. I thought about the voice, about the promise I had made to myself to not waste this second chance. And in that moment, something clicked. This was my purpose. Not just to survive, but to fight. To fight for myself, for my community, for all the people who didn't get a second chance like I did. To be the change, just like the voice had said. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be days when the weight of it all felt too heavy to carry. But I wasn't alone. I had my family, my community, and something greater than myself guiding me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air wash over me. I wasn't the same Jamal who had driven those streets months ago, lost and unsure of his place in the world. I had found my path, my purpose, and I wasn't turning back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this amazing story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos like this. See you next time.